Hey everybody, it's the 9th episode of UIO, the new podcast for teenage girls. Hugs to everyone and thank you for joining UIO, the podcast for teenage girls. It is for you and about you inside out. I am Sonja Lewis, your host. Today we're talking about family, a big topic. Let's face it, family matters, but here's the thing. Family relationships can be challenging. While parents and guardians think they know best, sometimes you think you know better. After all, it is your life and your friends are doing it. Whatever you want to do, so why can't you? I don't know. You'll have to ask your parent, your guardian, and to do that, you'll need a few tools, good communication skills, and an understanding of boundaries, and so on. To help us with this is Helen Lewis, a relationships guru of sorts. Founder of Literally PR, not only has this woman brokered many relationships between her clients and the media, she knows quite a bit about managing families too. A wife and mother of 2 young girls, Helen reads 5 books at a time most of the time and still effectively communicates with everyone. Let's meet her now. Welcome, Helen. These days, there are so many different types of families. Blended families, single parents, more than one family in a household, traditional, gay and lesbian parents, and so on. The dynamics are so different. No one size fits all. But what all families have in common is that they're human and they need to relate to each other to thrive, to have healthy family relationships. Also, healthy relationships can be challenging even if they are healthy. It's just a fact of life. And so let's start by talking about relating. If you don't express yourself, you don't get your point across, which can lead to pent-up emotions. But you also need to listen. Communications is two-sided, and sometimes I don't think that's clear. I've learned a lot of textbook ways of communicating, but also common sense stuff as a communicator myself. And some of it works, and some of it has to be adapted to the times. And all of it has to be practiced. But let's face it, in our fast-paced world where communications is changing increasingly, girls are influenced by the world they're growing up in. But also there's a need to have your own voice at, whatever age you are. And so I want to start off by asking you, what does it mean to communicate with family members of a clearly different generation and who understand the world through different times?
Well, I think the main point really that we keep going back to whenever I think about communication is a self-awareness. So it's a self-awareness deep within your core of what you believe and who you are. And then there's a confidence of being able to communicate that, feeling that you're entitled to be able to communicate that with any generation.
Yes.
Whether it be with your sibling, whether it be with somebody younger than you, with your parent, with your grandparent, and then vice versa. And I think teenage girls struggle with having this really strong self-awareness because there are so many external factors, like you mentioned, that it can become quite a battlefield as a teenage girl to work out who you are. I think the main thing to remember when you're talking to a parent or a grandparent is that they've probably been through very similar battles. And actually, just because you're an adult or a grandparent doesn't mean that you are fully self-aware.
Yeah.
So I think it's just realising that not everybody's perfect, but that you can communicate your true self to people if you have the confidence to do so.
That's fantastic. Or let's say you still feel a little bit sketchy about it. What are some of the ways that you can communicate with your parent, your grandparent, your auntie, or the adults in your life?
I sort of go back to when I was a teenager and I did a lot of writing. I used to write letters to my parents. And I mean, emails weren't really even a thing when I was a teenager, but when I went to university, I spent a long time emailing people because then that gives you the chance to sort of edit and try again and almost perfect what you want to say.
Yeah.
So writing is one way of communicating.
Yes.
That gives you real control over what you're trying to say.
What about language? I mean, teenagers have their texting, they have emojis, and I do love the emojis.
I do too.
I confess that. But I understand them to a certain degree because I'm putting myself out there trying to understand them.
Yes.
Every adult is not doing that. So what can you say about the language barriers?
I think it doesn't have to be an isolating language, but you can make it an isolating language. So I think if there's negativity between two people, or a barrier between two people to communicate, then that will be a problem. The use of language that people don't understand. But I think fundamentally we all do speak the same sort of language. I mean, you can have a conversation with somebody who doesn't even speak English. You know, you can gesticulate, you can kind of role play almost. There's ways of communicating. And I don't adhere to the idea of, teenagers speak a different language. I think they choose to if they want to, and there's probably a reason why they've chosen to speak to you in that particular way, because they don't want you to understand.
Well, how can we convince our teenage girls who are listening to let us in? Let us in this loop, because I did read some research that this language of teens, whether it's their slang that they're communicating, that they tend to change it. It's like inside information.
Yes.
When they find out that we understand it now, so girls don't go change it right away. When they find out that adults understand it, they sort of begin to change the words. They say that's not cool, and cool is one of the words that's not cool anymore.
Yeah.
But what can we suggest of, how can you do things to bring your parents, your guardians, and different people into that world enough to be able to communicate with them?
I think it's all about choice. So I think if you choose to be communicating in a very slang-heavy or colloquial way, then you're deliberately doing that because you know that the person you're speaking to isn't going to understand fully. So it's just about going back to basics. But I mean, just as I'm saying this, I'm remembering when I was a kid, you would have your own language with your best friend.
Yes.
And you would, you mix up words in different orders and things. And I generally just think it's part of growing up.
Yes.
And also of having a sense of belonging.
Yes.
So, I wouldn't ever say that teenagers or anybody shouldn't have their own way of communicate or language, but I think it's just about how you want to communicate. And if you're finding that your mum is regularly saying to you, oh, will you just please stop, using that word, or I think you've got to try and understand it from their perspective. They're frustrated because they want that. Most parents want to actually be let in and help.
Yeah, teach them. Tell them some of the language and what it means and so forth and so on. Because I had a session with my niece. What does this mean? And it was fun.
It is fun, and the thing, like I said, we've all done it. So it's just an evolution of language, and it will always be there. So parents who struggle with their kids talking in a different language, they need to try and remember that that's just how it is. But there does need to be, again, this trust, really, and this confidence that you can talk to each other in a different language. Go back to basics, proper old school English, however you want to talk. But if you really want your parents to listen, then you're probably best advised to not be using too much slang, otherwise they're not going to have a clue what you're saying.
That's true. Well, let's talk about belonging. You mentioned the sense of belonging and everything. It's important to know that you're a part of a family. Yes. And I remember when I was I was older than, maybe an older teenager, 18 or 19. I was doing some sort of workshop, an exercise, and I drew a picture of the family unit. And to me, it was just fine. It was me, my parents, siblings, or whatever. And for some reason, it was pointed out to me that I was sort of at a distance. And this was a person who obviously understood, psychoanalysis and all of that. And I remember that because I never felt that I was at a distance. I always felt fairly close to my parents. But I want you to talk about that. This thing about belonging. Is there anything girls can do to feel that they have this sense of belonging in the family unit?
I think the sense of belonging is hugely important to teenage girls. And that's, again, going back to my teenage years, having that security where I could go home, close the door, be with my family, sort of really be my true self, it was very important. Away from school, away from clubs, away from the other things you had to do, and where sometimes maybe you had to be slightly different to who you truly are, because at school you have to always be on, and at home you could just relax. That's really important, that you have that sense of being able to be yourself in your home environment, but also that you're happy for everyone else to be themselves in your home environment. So that there's that sense of belonging. And there's also a sense of belonging to a team, I think.
Yes.
So whether you've got siblings or whether it's just you and your mum and dad or just you and your mum, I think that having that sense of team spirit is really important. And to have that, you really do need to spend time together. And it just needs to be the way it is. And as you get older, you have many more reasons to leave the home.
Yes.
But I think it's being mindful of trying to go back to be together, just to be.
Yes.
You don't have to do anything, just be.
Yes, this brings up so much, but there are two things that I'm going to pluck out of it. And one of them is boundaries. And the other one, let's deal with first. That's roles. When you are a part of a family unit, in terms of roles, when I was a teenager, I was pretty clear on roles. You know, I knew what I had to do. Yep. I knew whether I was the person who was washing the dishes. I knew I had to, you know, make up my room and all of that. But I have noticed in familiar and some unfamiliar situations, teenagers are so busy now. Their lives are busier than ours. And that is pretty busy.
Yeah.
and this can be boys or girls, but we are talking about girls. And so sometimes roles have kind of fallen away. And I want to know if you think that roles such as these are important in teaching discipline and responsibility. And I know you have your own two daughters, and so you can speak very directly about this. And in any case, what does it mean to have a role or roles in a family? Is it important?
I think it's really important to have a role in the family. But what I do find, I'm incredibly strong on female empowerment, basically, and feminism, and I fundamentally disagree with there being gender-specific roles. So, for example, recently there was an advert in the newspaper, and it said something like, this little girl will get a reward for doing the dishes. And it really raised my hackles because I thought, well, yeah, no. You know, what about the son? Why can't he be doing it? Anyway, yes. I'm very, very keen on the girls, my daughters, doing any job really to help us out. So whether it be, I mean, they quite like doing the dishes because it's fun and there's bubbles. They're 8 and 6. Yeah. But, that's that I'll wear off. But you know, we also get them to help with washing the car, with the gardening, with tidying up, with hoovering, and so it's every type of job rather than assigning a specific chore to them.
I think that's excellent. And I remember, again, as a teenager, I was very clear what my roles were. But as you said, we did everything. I grew up in the country. I knew how to ride a lawnmower. I know that shocks a lot of you. I knew how to do all of that stuff. In those days, I knew how to change a tire. I don't know anymore. I'm very happy not to ever know again. My mother and father both taught us all of those things. We knew how to do those things. So it wasn't gender specific for us. But I think that, that's important that you make that point.
Yeah.
And that it is important for people to have roles because it does create some sense of responsibility.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah. Well, what about boundaries? Why are boundaries important? Because you mentioned the older you get, the less you are at home. You have places to go, people to see, and so forth and so on. But what about boundaries? You know, there's still a family unit, there's still a household, there might be curfews, there might be different things. Can you talk to us a little bit about this?
When I was... it was about 2 years ago, I was talking to a lady who's a parenting expert, obviously through my job. She'd written a book, and she was advising me that it's really, really healthy to have boundaries. You know, don't think it's a bad thing to say, this is as far as you're allowed to go in this particular subject area, and if you cross that line, there are going to be repercussions. I always thought I'd be the quite chilled out parent, and I didn't want to have too many boundaries, but it turns out that's really not how it should be. According to this parenting expert, because if you don't know your boundaries, then you just don't know how far you can go, what's permissible, what's not. You don't have a clear right from wrong. There's too many grey areas. So I strongly believe there needs to be boundaries, but that respects everybody. So the reason why there'd be a curfew, say at 11 o'clock at night, would be because everyone's asleep by that point. Everyone's in the house, and if you come zooming in, you've just pulled up in your new car and just passed your test, and you're zooming in at midnight, which I admit I've done with no thought about anybody else. Then that's just not being very self-aware, but it's also not being mindful of other people. So I think you've got to think about why these boundaries are there. Is it for everybody, or is it just for the benefit of one person?
That's excellent, and it brings us to the next question about respect and values. Boundaries are obviously in place, as you say, for many different reasons, but sometimes it may seem a bit trivial. But sometimes it can be disrespectful or dishonoring the family boundaries, because I think it's important, because oftentimes as a teenager, and I think even sometimes as adults, sometimes we do things and we're not even thinking about other people.
You need to be mindful of other people and respectful of what they are asking. If you're not sure about why they are asking for that particular boundary to be in place, you should talk to them about it and get them to reason with you and explain to you why they've set that boundary. For example, if you're allowed to go to a club every Saturday, you know, your parents are funding it, they encourage you to go, but then you decide you're just not going to go. You know, where's the boundary there? What do you say? How do you communicate that you just don't want to go to that club anymore? They've funded it for the next term, for example.
Yes.
What do you say? And if you can't sit down and have that conversation with them, then again we go right back to the beginning. There's a self-awareness issue. There's a confidence issue. There's a sense of belonging issue. You need to be able to voice how you feel about things. But then you need to also think about the fact, well, you know, they've committed this money, they've committed this time to ferry me here and there to this club. So the repercussions of your behaviours going against the boundaries need to be considered in the context of this family unit. The thing about families is that there's always going to be more than one person.
Yes.
You have to think about more than one person in terms of whether you're going to overstep the boundary or not.
Yeah, and if you have a jolly good reason, like something's going on that's unhealthy at the club, then you, going back to your original point, then you must communicate that.
And it's all about having the chance to be able to do that. And I think the problem is we are all so busy. You know, as parents, I find myself incredibly busy, and sometimes I can find myself not really listening to what my child is saying to me, because I'm cooking dinner, I'm checking an email, I'm, you know, helping one with their homework, and then the other one comes in and says, "Mummy, can I do this, that and the other?" And you can't do everything.
And you're reading 5 books at one time.
Yeah, exactly. I'm always reading a book. It's all about getting the time to sit down. I guess it's picking your time, isn't it?
To be able to do that.
Yeah.
Well, everybody is busy, but we need to spend family time together. So let's talk about privacy, because teen girls need their privacy too. And it's probably particularly during that time where the self-awareness really starts to come into play. But let's talk about trust. Okay. You know, as associated with privacy, how do you build that trust so that people are able to get that privacy? And maybe they are 2 separate issues, and I'm sure they are. But, you know, how do you build trust so that people trust you to have the time that you need to yourself?
I think building trust is easy if you've always had that level of being able to talk and communicate. I think the problem with trust is when you or someone else fails you in that trust. So you let someone down, or they let you down. And then it's rebuilding that trust again. I think that's where it's much, much more complex.
Yeah.
And I think the problem is that teenagers, as teenagers, we would always go out and push boundaries and try new things and, you know, experiment. And sometimes the parents can feel let down on that, and they can feel like they haven't got the same trust in their child as they had before.
Yeah.
You know, that my child has changed. My child is not the same person anymore.
Yeah.
And that's very difficult, because rebuilding trust is very hard.
Yeah.
It's not something that comes that naturally to people, I find.
Yeah, I'm thinking about my own teenage years now, and I'm sort of sitting here smiling and thinking, the big deal then, I think, was the telephone. It was having your own telephone in your bedroom and being able to talk on the telephone. So you're supposed to be off the telephone by X, time at night, and you're not. And your parents find out that you've been whispering on the covers and talking on the telephone, and that is a violation of trust. Whereas as a teenage girl, you're thinking, well, I'm not hurting anybody. And it goes back to what you said. I'm a part of this family unit, but also I have to get up the next morning very early and go to school. So I need to be healthy. I need to have had my sleep, but I haven't done it because I've been on the phone. And I think now a big issue with trust, particularly around social media.
Social media is a massive minefield. I mean, we didn't have social media
when
we were teenagers, and my kids are already aware of social media at the age of 6 and 8. And I think this new generation of children that are going to be teenagers in 10 years' time are going to have a whole different set of issues surrounding social media to those that are teenagers now. I think the main thing is, again, to set boundaries. So, for example, if you want to be on social media and you're a teenager and legally you're allowed to be on social media from the age of 12, Facebook has these limits people are allowed to be on social media. There is no reason why they shouldn't be on social media. But from a parent's perspective, there are concerns, not just about whether they're getting enough sleep because they're texting all night. But there's bullying, there's cyberbullying, which can be an incredibly serious...
And there's strangers.
There's strangers that are just grooming people and doing horrendous things. There are... but down to just, your school peers.
Yeah.
There's all sorts of horrendous pressure. And, as I said earlier, I could go home and I could close the door on my school day and I could be safe in my home environment. Nobody could get me. Nobody could reach me. Now, you are, as long as you've got your phone in your bedroom, anybody, anyone from your school could be texting you. You could be on group messages. There's no let up now for teenagers.
Here's an idea to consider, I think. The telephones go. They've got some very disgruntled, unhappy teenagers when it happens. But at a certain time at night, 2 mothers that I know at least have said, okay, computers go off, the telephones go. I tried to let you keep it in your room. That didn't work. So we just take it. We just take it downstairs.
I mean, I can't guarantee what I'm going to be doing in 10 years' time, but that's my thought of how I'm going to manage it, is that there's going to be a cut-off point. And at that point, I take the phone or the tablet or whatever it is away and it's gone, because I don't want my children to be on all the time, switched on all the time. I want them to be able to go to bed, to read a book, to relax, to have some privacy time, to be on their own, to have time to think.
Yes.
And they just won't get it all the while that their smartphone is switched on.
I think that's fantastic. And I think that if more of us thought of it in that way, because you're right. All this stuff is coming home with you. It's coming into your bedroom with you. You don't have any privacy. So this privacy that you want, you don't have it.
No.
And so I think perhaps if we looked at it from that perspective, we might begin to see it a little bit differently.
But also communicate that. So as a parent, communicate that's what you're doing. You're trying to give them that time.
Yeah.
And as a teenager, understand that you do get your phone the next morning. So when you turn it on, you can catch up on your Facebook timeline, you can catch up on your Instagram posts, it's fine. It's still going to be there the next day.
Which really leads me to the issue of respect. When you're disgruntled and really ticked off because somebody took your phone or gave you a curfew or did whatever. How do you, because it is important not to keep it bottled up and pent up.
Yes, it is.
How do you communicate, with your parent and still be respectful? How do you respect? Because you do have your boundaries. You are part of the family unit. You are the child. You've got the parent. Let's talk about that a little bit.
Okay. Well, from my perspective, I think you're absolutely right. You do need to let it out, because if you don't let it out, it's like a pan of water that's simmering on the oven, okay, and if it's got a lid on it, and if you just keep on simmering every time that your mum takes your phone from you, every time that your dad tells you, why have you left your homework at the last minute, why are you doing this, why are you doing that, questioning you, eventually that lid will start shaking.
Yes.
Pop, it goes. All the steam comes out, and it will be an explosion, because that's human nature. You can't bottle that up. So every time your parents do something, or you feel like they're doing something that's wronging you, then you either, I think, write it down. Journaling is a really good idea. And when you really think, look, I've got to say something here, you've got to try and find the right time to do it. So just if you're doing it as your mum's grabbing your phone and you're both really, that's only going to end negatively.
Yeah.
If you can kind of go, take 10 seconds out, right, I'm just going to think about this now, and then you go into a different place, different room in the house and say, Mum, we've really got to talk about this. Why are you taking my phone from me at 7 o'clock? I don't go to bed till 10, so why can we not, let's negotiate on this. Can we talk about maybe an extra hour?
Yeah.
Or maybe if I've done all my chores and my homework, maybe we could talk about that as well. Different rules for the weekend, whatever. But, put your point across, but be also aware that your parents don't have to agree to what you say.
Well, this is it. I was going to ask you, at what point do you respect the no?
Yeah, I think you put your point across, and you do your best to calmly and in a self-aware manner talk about your feelings and how what you would like. But at the end of the day, they're your parents. You know, you're under their roof essentially. So you've got to have a point in your own mind where you can say, look, I'm not gonna keep battling on this one, and I've negotiated, and this is as good as it gets.
Yeah, I've seen, whether it's on documentaries or whether it's just being in a restaurant or through family relations and friends, a very different way that teenagers speak to their parents and to the way, you know, I remember speaking to my parents. I had reverence for my parents when they said no.
That's a boundary. You had a boundary. You knew how far you could push it, and like I say, all teenagers will push the boundaries because that's what teenagers do, and that's how we are programmed to experience new things, to become more independent. But your parents have been there, they've lived, they've had a lot of life experience, and I think that should be enough for you to think, I'm not going to keep pushing this. There is a respect thing entirely intertwined in all of this, because if you don't respect your parents, then you're not listening to what they're saying, you don't want to communicate with them, you don't care about their opinions. But if you do respect them, then there's a whole change. But also, respect breeds respect. So, you know, they need to, your parents need to respect you, and you need to respect them. It can't really be one-way traffic, can it, with respect?
No, it needs to go both ways. And that brings us to the next point, I think, about perfection and how we perceive each other, or the lack of perfection. As painful as it is to admit, we adults, we're not perfect.
No, exactly.
You know, we're just not. And sometimes life is not exemplary of what you want for your children. And I remember, again, when I was growing up, you know, we call them, the sort of old folks used to say, do as I say, not as I do. And for some reason, that seemed to work. And maybe it didn't, but we didn't let them know that it didn't work. But that doesn't seem to work with modern day teens, and I don't think it should work because, it's, as you said, it's two-way, traffic, and it's a bit hypocritical, and that's a part of, I think, why we've had this seismic shift in values, because we've been a bit hypocritical. We expect younger people to behave a certain way, but we're off doing whatever.
Yeah, exactly.
And we seem to be doing it on a global scale now, and that's part of what this podcast is about, is coming back and saying, we owe it to you, you know, that we've got this wrong, and so we've got to try to get it right. And how can we get girls to absolve their parents of imperfection, of modeling the perfect life? You know, how can we get our teenage girls not to blame, you know, their mothers for everything, or their fathers that goes wrong in their life? You know, what can we say? How can we get them to also understand that, you know, we're not perfect?
I think it's a taking responsibility thing, isn't it, really, on both sides. So it's just taking responsibility for who you are as a person. I think there's a lot of pressure on children now to perform in school from primary school age, and I think that infiltrates right up through to college and uni years. And I think there's a lot of that perfection and sort of enforced perfection, and you've got to try hard, you've got to this is put on by the parents, primarily because they want the best for their children, and they see others doing it, and they think that academic success, for example, equals perfection. Or
so it's peer pressure from the adult side.
I think so.
Yeah.
But it comes from a good place in that they just want the best for their child. But unfortunately, you know, that can then cause problems for the teenager or the young adult who looks at their parents and thinks, well, you didn't do that. You didn't achieve that. You didn't manage any of these things you're trying to make me do, you know. It really goes back to communication and talking about it. So saying, look, I want the best for you, so I'm trying to help you with your schooling, or I'm trying to give you encouragement because I didn't have that chance myself, perhaps, or because I had this challenge in my life, and talking about your challenges as a parent openly with your child, and then hopefully they will want to talk to you as well, and then you need to listen. As a parent, you need to be listening to what your child is saying.
Yes, because they won't always want to do that one thing. I mean, is it possible to separate the parental relationship from the parent-child one, and maybe I'm not asking that the right way. You're a parent, you've got your relationship with your spouse, if you have a spouse, or you've got your relationship with your partner, or you may not have a partner, but you have someone, that you're seeing or whatever. Because often we've heard people say, from a broken home, for example, staying together is for the children. But my husband and I do this marriage preparation course where we support engaged couples through our church. And we've come to understand that children are the beneficiaries of a healthy, loving relationship. But they're also inheriting an unhealthy one. And every relationship that has an argument isn't unhealthy, is what I'm trying to say. Every relationship that's having problems isn't unhealthy. But your kids are watching you. So
they're learning all the time.
And they're learning all the time. So what can we do, and what can girls do, in terms of sort of healing and just understanding that these are just people too. They're just trying to make it in the world. Because there are some broken, unhealthy relationships. But healthy relationships don't look like these perfect things that we see in sitcoms.
Yes.
People have arguments.
Yeah. People do. That is life. And people have ups and downs, and they have challenges, and they deal with them in different ways.
Yes.
And, if your family suffers a bereavement, then you might find that really impacts on your parents' behaviour.
Yes.
They might withdraw. One might withdraw. The other one might get really anxious or upset or cry more, and then you really see them for the human beings that they are. I think parents need to be to show emotions from the get-go, and I think and encourage their children to also be able to feel confident enough to show their emotions. And if you can see each other responding naturally to bad stuff, it's natural to feel sad if something bad happens.
Yes.
It's okay to feel bad, that this does happen from time to time in life. And I think you need to be able to be yourself in your home environment. And if you can all, as a family, be yourselves and respond naturally to sad situations or bad situations, then it will become normal. It'll become normal to see that sometimes mum and dad have a row because they're really annoyed with each other because that something has just happened. For example, they've just moved house. You've just moved house.
Yes.
There's loads of stress surrounding that. And so you have to sort of look at their lives almost separate to your own as a teenager, don't you? You can't always think everything mum and dad do is right and perfect and good.
Yes.
Because they are people, just like you. They feel emotions and they respond to natural situations.
I think that's so key. Because I didn't think that I thought of my parents as people until I was a young woman. Yeah, and then when children grow up, we often see people who are angry with their parents because they didn't have an opportunity to talk about it, and mom and dad didn't do this and they didn't do that. And I think the point that we're trying to make is we're all human. And so it's important to have these healthy relationships where you can talk to each other. Having a healthy relationship doesn't mean that you're never going to disagree. No, it doesn't mean that you're never going to feel sad or have arguments, but it does mean talking it through and working it out and resolving problems.
And teenage girls have a voice, and teenage girls need to be able to share that voice. And again, self-awareness. You need to be able to feel confident enough to voice your own opinions, your thoughts, your feelings. So if you're struggling with your parent and you feel like you can't get your voice across, you need to say, I feel, I think, rather than you're doing this, you're doing that, you're doing that. It's very much, you take ownership of it. So I feel like this. I feel like this could change. And it's very difficult to argue with somebody else's feelings.
That's fantastic. That's brilliant. I still have to ask if there's anything else that you want to add or leave with teenage girls. I mean, those were brilliant points.
I just think, just enjoy your time as much as possible, because life is very short and you have a lot going for you as a teenage girl. Be confident, be happy, and be self-aware.
That's fantastic, Helen. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
It's been a great show. Thank you.
That is a wrap for UIO Your Family. Very inspirational show with lots of great takeaways. Thank you, girls, for listening, and thank you, God, for the opportunity to do the show. Today, I want to pray for family relationships the world over, knowing that healthy families breed healthy societies. I pray for more effective communications between parents and teenagers and for mutual respect, too. Also, I pray that every teenage girl becomes self-aware, a crucial aid to expression. I ask these blessings in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen. Tune in about a week for the last episode of UIO and this pilot series for some straight talk with author Natalie Savides on peer pressure. Until then, hit me up on Twitter at Sonja Lewis, Instagram at Sonja D. Lewis, Facebook on thisandthat.co.uk/UIO-podcast. Tell me what you want to hear about in the 2018 series. We'll keep those questions coming on any of the episodes. Take care of you inside out, and remember, it is UIO.